Water is a precious commodity in California, and for much more than just drinking. It sustains the state's $50 billion agriculture industry and the livelihoods of those who work in it. It provides a habitat for wildlife and electricity to power the world's fifth largest economy.
38% of America's jobs now are coming out of the state of California. 38%.
But California and all the western United States are in the midst of a record-breaking drought.
These last 2 years in California are the driest 2 years on record.
The state's lakes are depleted, its forests scorched by wildfires, its rivers drying up. Here at this reservoir near Sacramento, the situation is growing increasingly dire. The water levels at Folsom Lake are quickly approaching their lowest levels in history. I'm standing on what would usually be the bottom of the lake, submerged under 30 meters of water. These floating docks would be full of boats. The lack of rain, and also less snow in the nearby Sierra Nevada mountains, means the reservoir is running dry.
Well, we rely on the Sierra Nevada for our water. It comes down through both the north and the south fork of the American River, which feed this lake. So we rely on that snow runoff. I hate seeing it like this, and it seems to be becoming our new norm.
Extremes like droughts, floods, and fires have always been a part of life in the western U.S. But a changing climate is presenting new challenges.
Climate change is making those extremes worse. What we expect as climate change continues to worsen, we expect more extremes, more long periods of drought, more severe flooding.
California farms are on the front lines of the crisis. Farms here produce more food than any other U.S. state, and they use about 80% of California's water delivered through a complex network of reservoirs and aqueducts. But because of the drought, they have had to make do with less.
So normally in the Sacramento Valley here, we flood about 100,000 hectares for rice straw decomposition and also for the birds and waterfowl. And this year that number is going to be more like 27,000 hectares.
When water becomes scarce, and if they're able to, farms are often forced to tap into groundwater wells, which are expensive to run. So this year, many farmers in this area transferred their water rights to other, more desperate farms, with the state effectively paying them not to use water.
In my district here, about 40% of the rice did not get planted because the water was transferred.
The California Department of Water Resources plays an important role in managing the state's water supply. The cycles brought on by climate change are testing that system like never before.
We've had one of the wettest years on record in 2017, and now some of the driest years on record just a few years later. And so that variability is really starting to stress the infrastructure to the edge of its capacity.
State regulators have warned that if the drought continues, local water agencies may not get any allocation of new water next year at all. For many farms, the impact would be devastating.
We have to prepare for the worst. Those guys south of the Delta who relied on our transfers this past year are going to be in a world of hurt.
When California runs low on water, it doesn't just affect agriculture. This reservoir is extremely important both for California's water supply infrastructure as well as hydroelectricity generation. For the first time in its history, state officials shut down one of the hydroelectric power plants here because of record low water levels. In a typical year, hydropower would account for around 15% of California's overall electricity. That's plummeted as water flows continue to decrease.
The amount of hydroelectric power that we produced in 2020 was down perhaps almost 50% from what we produced in 2017. This year, the federal government is predicting that the hydropower production will be half of what it was last year. So we're down to really a small fraction of what we've been able to utilize traditionally, and that's a big indicator of how much water we have to work with.
And less hydropower means more reliance on gas-fired power plants. While renewables account for about a third of California's in-state electricity, wind and solar power often aren't accessible to California's grid when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. And that grid has been severely overstretched at times lately, partly as a result of people using more air conditioning as the temperatures rise.
I've saved 7,510.7 pounds of CO2 emissions, or the equivalent of planting 57 trees. Thumbs up. And
Proponents of home solar systems paired with battery storage see solutions on the horizon.
The drought has reduced the output of all of the hydroelectric dams. The important point to make here, though, is if we continue to invest in solar, we can pretty easily replace the capacity of our hydroelectric dams with distributed solar.
There is hope, too, that better water management will help conserve this important resource for future generations.
The focus right now is really on groundwater storage. We've got lots of capacity within our groundwater basins throughout the state. And so moving water when it's available in the flood season, in winter when we do get it, and in wet years, to groundwater where we can store it and then get it back out when we get into our next drought.
Competing interests and ideas have made long-term investment difficult. As water levels keep sinking and temperatures keep rising, the situation is growing more urgent by the day. Californians have been asked to voluntarily reduce water use. Soon, it may be mandatory. As the reality of the changing climate sinks in, the true cost of water is now surfacing for many in California.